What happens when ancient sacred waters meet desperate love? When a broken cowboy becomes the guardian of something beyond imagination. This story will take you deep into the heart of the American frontier, where healing comes not from medicine, but from the courage to trust again. If you love stories of redemption, mystery, and the power of love to transcend all boundaries, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales that will touch your heart and expand your mind. Now let's begin with a storm that would change everything. The cowboy who saved a pregnant woman in a blizzard never expected what she'd give birth to. Part Psalm 1, when the earth dances with the sky. The wind howled across the Arizona territory like the voices of the damned, carrying with it a snowfall that had no business falling in October. Elijah Ravencrest stood on the porch of his weathered ranch house, watching the storm build with the kind of attention a man learns when survival depends on reading the sky's moods. 3 years of solitude had taught him to notice things other men missed. The way the horses huddled closer to the barn when death was riding the wind. The particular silence that fell just before the earth decided to unleash its fury. The hollow ache in his chest that always grew stronger when storms approached, as if his grief had learned to predict the weather. At 34, Elijah carried himself with the careful precision of a man who had seen too much and lost more than he could bear to remember. His Cherokee blood, inherited from a grandmother who spoke in prophecies, gave him high cheekbones and dark eyes that seemed to hold depths of ancient sadness. His Irish father had left him with auburn hair that caught fire in sunlight and a stubborn streak that had kept him breathing when death would have been a mercy. The Whispering Creek Ranch sprawled across 2,000 acres of high desert bordered by red rock formations that glowed like embers at sunset. But it was the creek itself that made this land special, a spring-fed stream that never ran dry even in drought years, that left neighboring ranches parched and barren. The water ran clearer than mountain air and colder than winter stars, with a taste that seemed to carry hints of something beyond the physical world. Local Apache called it Thunder Springs and spoke of it in whispers that carried equal parts reverence and fear. Mexican vaqueros crossed themselves when they drank from it, muttering prayers in Spanish about agua bendita. Even the Anglo settlers, practical men who had little use for superstition, admitted there was something different about the water that flowed through Elijah's land. But Elijah no longer listened to spirits or paid attention to the whispers of ancient wisdom. 3 years ago, he had learned that love was not armor against loss, and hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. The storm intensified, driving snow horizontally across the ranch yard with violent persistence. Elijah was about to retreat inside when movement caught his eye, a dark shape struggling against the wind near the eastern boundary of his property. At first, he thought it might be a lost calf, but as lightning illuminated the landscape in stark relief, he realized it was something else entirely. A horse, riderless, stumbling through the snow with the desperate gait of an animal pushed beyond endurance. Elijah's ranger instincts, dormant but never truly dead, sparked to immediate life. He grabbed his heavy coat and rifle from inside the house, then stepped into the storm's embrace. The cold hit him like a physical blow, but he pushed forward, following the sound of the struggling animal. The horse was a beautiful paint mare, her coat plastered with snow and foam, her sides heaving with exhaustion. Blood stained the saddle horn and stirrup leather, dark stains that spoke of violence and desperation. As Elijah approached, carefully speaking in the low, soothing tones he'd learned from Apache horse breakers, the mare lifted her head and whinnied softly. That's when he saw the tracks leading away from where the horse had collapsed. Human footprints, small and unsteady, disappearing into the swirling darkness toward Thunder Springs. Following the trail required every skill he'd learned during his years as a Texas Ranger. The snow tried to cover the tracks as quickly as they were made, but Elijah's eyes, trained to read stories written in disturbed earth and bent grass, followed the desperate path of someone seeking shelter. He found her at the edge of Thunder Springs, collapsed in the shallows, where the water bubbled up from underground sources that had never been mapped or fully understood. Even unconscious, her hands were pressed protectively over her swollen belly, and Elijah realized with a shock that he was looking at a woman in the advanced stages of pregnancy. She was young, perhaps 26, with the kind of beauty that spoke of Spanish bloodlines mixed with something else. Her dark hair spread around her face like spilled ink, and her clothes, though travel-worn and torn, were of fine quality. This was no common traveler caught in an unexpected storm. For a moment that stretched like eternity, Elijah froze. The sight of her there, vulnerable and bleeding, brought back memories he'd spent 3 years trying to bury. Mariana lying in their bed after the fever took her. Little Tommy no bigger than a whisper growing cold in his arms. But this woman was still breathing, still fighting. The water of Thunder Springs seemed to glow with phosphorescent light as Elijah waited in his practical mind, attributing the effect to minerals reflecting the lightning. But his Cherokee grandmother's voice whispered in his memory, speaking of sacred places where the boundary between worlds grew thin. She was lighter than he'd expected, though her condition made him handle her with infinite care. As he lifted her from the water, she stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open to reveal depths the color of rich coffee. "Roberto," she whispered in accented English, her voice barely audible above the storm. "Roberto, they found us. They killed him." Elijah's blood chilled. Roberto, the name hit him like a physical blow, bringing with it a flood of memories from his ranger days. Roberto Delgado, the Mexican vaquero who had saved his life during a border raid 5 years ago. Roberto, who had written him letters filled with excitement about his new wife and the child they were expecting. Roberto, who according to the last letter Elijah had received 6 months ago, had died in a mining accident near Tombstone. The woman she had to be Roberto's wife, though Elijah had never met her, stirred in his arms. Her eyes opened again, focusing on his face with an expression of confusion and desperate hope. "Dios mío." She breathed, her hand rising to touch his cheek with trembling fingers. "Roberto said you had the same eyes as the ancient spirits, eyes that see beyond the veil between worlds." "I'm not Roberto, Senora," Elijah said gently, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. "My name is Elijah Ravencrest. Roberto was my friend, but he's gone now. You're safe here." But even as he spoke the words, Elijah wondered if they were true, because the woman in his arms carried secrets in her coffee-colored eyes, and secrets in Arizona territory had a way of getting good men killed. Inside the ranch house, Elijah moved with the efficient care of a man who had tended wounds before. He laid the woman on the bed in what had once been his and Mariana's room, then busied himself gathering supplies, clean cloth, whiskey, for disinfecting water heated on the wood-burning stove. The storm continued its assault on the windows, but inside the small bedroom, a different kind of tempest was brewing. The woman had slipped back into unconsciousness, but she murmured constantly in Spanish words about water and danger, about someone named Colonel Blackwood, about a child who must be protected at all costs. As Elijah cleaned the cut on her forehead, a clean slice that spoke of a blade rather than accident, he studied her face in the lamplight. She was beautiful, but it was a beauty carved by hardship and determination. Her hands, when he examined them for other injuries, bore the calluses of someone who worked hard despite her obvious refinement. A sound from the kitchen made him look up the soft padding of bare feet on wooden floors. Ayana appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of concern and something that looked almost like recognition. The girl was perhaps 12 years old, though her small frame and serious demeanor sometimes made her seem both younger and older. Elijah had found her 8 months ago, half dead from starvation and exposure, wandering alone in the desert after her family had been killed in a cavalry raid. She rarely spoke about her past, but her connection to the sacred springs was undeniable. "The water spirits told me she would come," Ayana said in her careful English, her young voice carrying an eerie certainty that still made Elijah uncomfortable. "They said she carries the old blood like you do. They said the three of us are meant to protect the sacred places together." Elijah looked back at the unconscious woman, noting the way the lamplight seemed to catch something in her features that spoke of mixed heritage. "What else do the spirits tell you, little one?" "That she brings great danger but also great hope," Ayana replied, moving closer to the bed. "They show me visions of a man with dead eyes who comes seeking the heart of all waters. But they also show me a child who will bridge the worlds between all peoples." Before Elijah could ask what she meant, the woman on the bed stirred, her eyes opening with sudden alertness. She looked around the room, taking in her surroundings with the quick assessment of someone who had learned to evaluate threats quickly. "Where am I?" she asked, her English accented but clear. "Whispering Creek Ranch," Elijah replied, moving closer to the bed. "About 20 miles north of Tucson. You collapsed by my spring. I'm Elijah Ravencrest, and this is Ayana." The woman's eyes widened at his name. "Elijah Roberto spoke of you often. He said you were the one man he trusted above all others, the one who understood the old ways even though you carried the blood of two peoples." "You're Roberto's wife," Elijah said, though it wasn't really a question. "Catalina Esperanza Morales," she replied, struggling to sit up despite his gentle protests. "And Roberto didn't die in a mining accident. He was murdered because he discovered something that powerful men would kill to possess." She reached toward the saddlebags Elijah had retrieved from her horse, her movements careful but determined. "The Agua Sagrada Network, Sacred Water Network. Roberto found the source, learned its secrets from the old Apache medicine men and my grandmother's Aztec bloodline." From the leather bag, she pulled out items that made Elijah's breath catch in his throat. Ancient artifacts that looked Mesoamerican in origin, obsidian blades, jade figurines, and stone tablets covered with symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Most disturbing of all was a leather-wrapped bundle that contained maps drawn in multiple hands showing waterways that didn't match any territory Elijah knew. "What kind of network?" he asked, though his grandmother's voice was already whispering the answer in his memory. "7 sacred springs," Catalina explained, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Connected by underground rivers that carry more than water, they carry the memories and wisdom of all the peoples who have lived on this land. Your Thunder Spring is one of them." She pulled out a small vial filled with water that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The power to heal, to cure sickness, perhaps even to restore life itself. Colonel Blackwood Marcus learned of it from Roberto's research, and he wants to control all 7 springs. "Blackwood," Elijah repeated the name, tasting like poison in his mouth. He'd heard stories of the colonel, a former cavalry officer turned mining magnate, who had made his fortune through methods that decent men didn't discuss in polite company. "He's dying." Catalina continued, her hand moving protectively to her belly. "Cancer eating him from the inside. But with control of the 7 springs, he believes he can live forever." As if summoned by her words, Ayana moved to the window, her young face grave with concern. "He comes," she said simply. "I can hear the water spirits crying out in warning. Many men with guns and hatred in their hearts." The sound drifted through the storm, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses approaching through the night. Elijah moved to the window, peering out into the lightning-split darkness. In the distance, he could see torches bobbing through the snow riders approaching his ranch with purpose and determination. "How many?" Catalina asked, already reaching for the rifle Elijah kept beside the bed. "Too many," Elijah replied, his ranger instincts calculating odds and escape routes. "At least 15 men, maybe more." That's when Ayana did something that made both adults stare in wonder. The girl moved to the stone fireplace and placed her small hands against the hearthstones. Where her fingers touched, the rock symbols began to glow with a soft, phosphorescent light, ancient pictographs that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. "Grandmother's tunnel," Ayana said simply. "She carved the path when the soldiers first came to steal the water. She knew we would need it someday." As if responding to the girl's words, one of the hearthstones shifted slightly. Elijah watched in amazement as Ayana pressed her hand against what appeared to be solid rock, and a section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges. "How long has this been here?" Catalina breathed, already gathering her belongings despite her condition. "Since before my grandfather built this house." Elijah realized understanding flooding through him. "The Apache always said this land was sacred. I thought they just meant the spring." The sound of approaching horses was closer now, followed by rough voices calling out commands. Blackwood's men were preparing to surround the house. "The tunnel leads to the heart chamber," Ayana said, her young voice carrying absolute certainty. "But we must all go together. The spirits say only the 3 together can walk the path and seal it behind us." Elijah looked at Catalina, seeing his own recognition reflected in her dark eyes. Whatever was happening here was bigger than any of them had imagined. The artifacts in her saddlebags, the maps showing ancient waterways, Ayana's supernatural connection to the springs, it was all connected to something that had been building for generations. The front door exploded inward just as the 3 of them slipped through the hidden passage. Blackwood's men burst into the house, guns drawn, expecting to find cowering prey. Instead, they found only empty rooms and the fading echo of footsteps. But Elijah, Catalina, and Ayana were already deep underground, following a tunnel carved from living rock by Apache hands generations ago. The passage was narrow but well made, with symbols carved into the walls that seemed to glow with their own inner light, guiding them deeper into the earth towards something that would change their understanding of the world forever. Behind them, they could hear Blackwood's frustrated roars echoing through the abandoned house. Ahead of them lay mysteries that would test their courage, their faith, and their willingness to become guardians of something far more precious than they had ever imagined. The sacred waters were calling, and for the first time in 3 years, Elijah Ravencrest felt truly alive. Part 2. Echoes in the Sacred Chamber. The tunnel system beneath Whispering Creek Ranch was far more extensive than Elijah had ever imagined. As they moved deeper underground, the phosphorescent symbols carved into the walls began to tell stories, pictographs that spoke of guardians and sacred trusts of water that carried the memories of all who had come before. Ayanna led them through the twisting passages with the confidence of someone following a familiar path. Her small hand traced the glowing symbols as they walked, and she whispered translations in a voice that seemed older than her 12 years. "This one tells of the first guardian," she said, pausing before a particularly elaborate carving. "A warrior who could speak to the water spirits and unite the scattered peoples under a single covenant of protection." Catalina moved carefully behind them, one hand pressed against the tunnel wall for support, the other protective over her unborn child. The exertion of their escape had taken its toll, and Elijah could see exhaustion etched in every line of her face. "How much farther?" he asked Ayanna, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. "We are almost there," the girl replied. "Can you not feel it? The heart of all waters calls to those who carry the ancient blood." As if summoned by her words, a new sensation began to fill the tunnel, a low humming that seemed to emanate from the rock itself, growing stronger with each step forward. The air grew warmer and carried with it the scent of minerals and something else, something that made Elijah's Cherokee heritage stir with recognition. Then the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber that stole his breath away. The cavern was enormous, its ceiling lost in shadows above. Phosphorescent minerals in the rock walls cast everything in an ethereal blue-green glow, but it was the pool at the chamber's center that commanded attention. The water was so clear, it seemed like liquid crystal fed by 7 distinct streams that flowed from openings carved into the cavern walls. Ancient pictographs covered every available surface, telling stories and symbols that spoke to something deeper than conscious understanding. But what struck Elijah most powerfully was the sense of presence in the chamber, as if generations of guardians still watched over this sacred place. The heart of all waters. Catalina breathed, moving toward the central pool despite her exhaustion. Roberto dreamed of finding this place, but he never imagined. She knelt beside the sacred pool, and as her hands touched the water, something miraculous happened. The bleeding that had been slowly draining her strength stopped completely. Color returned to her pale cheeks, and for the first time since Elijah had found her, she looked truly at peace. "The child grows strong," Ayanna said solemnly, approaching the pool with reverent steps. "The water knows its own." But the commotion of wonder was interrupted by sounds echoing down from the tunnel behind them. Blackwood had found the hidden entrance. "They come," Ayanna said, her young face grave with responsibility beyond her years. "But the heart chamber will not suffer the touch of those who would defile the sacred trust." As if responding to her words, the water in the central pool began to glow more brightly. The very air in the cavern seemed to thicken with otherworldly presence, and Elijah could swear he heard voices whispering in languages older than human memory. "What do we do?" Catalina asked, struggling to stand despite the healing she had received. "We prepare," a new voice answered from one of the side passages. "And we trust in the old alliances that have protected these waters for generations." The speaker emerged from the shadows, an Apache warrior in traditional dress, but carrying modern weapons. His face was weathered by decades of desert sun, and his eyes held the wisdom of someone who had walked between two worlds and found his place in both. "Chief Running Wolf," Elijah said, recognition and relief flooding through him in equal measure. He had heard stories of the legendary Apache leader, but never expected to meet him face to face. Elijah Ravencrest, son of Thomas Ravencrest, who rode with Kit Carson, grandson of Mariah Singing Waters, who kept the old traditions alive. Running Wolf's voice carried formal respect, but also warmth. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. She taught many of us that blood is not determined by the color of skin, but by the loyalty of the heart." More Apache warriors began emerging from the various tunnels, men and women who moved like shadows, armed with both traditional weapons and captured army rifles. They spread out around the chamber with practiced efficiency, preparing for a battle that would determine the fate of the sacred springs. How many? Elijah asked his ranger training, automatically assessing their defensive position. Enough, Running Wolf replied grimly. But Blackwood has brought surprises we did not expect. Artillery pieces stolen from the army depot near Phoenix. He means to collapse these tunnels and bury the sacred waters forever if he cannot control them. The implications hit Elijah like a landslide. Blackwood wasn't just after the healing powers of the springs, he was planning to destroy the entire underground river system that sustained life across hundreds of miles of desert. The network, Catalina said, understanding the full horror of what they faced. If this chamber falls, it will crack the aquifer. The whole system could drain into the earth, leaving nothing but dust. Ayana moved to the edge of the sacred pool, her young face illuminated by the phosphorescent glow. "The spirits show me visions," she said quietly. "Great changes coming to this land, but also great hope if we have the courage to embrace what we must become." Before anyone could ask what she meant, the sound of approaching boots echoed from multiple tunnels. Blackwood had found reinforcements, and he was coming from several directions at once. "Positions," Running Wolf commanded his warriors, fading into defensive positions among the rock formations. "Let them come to us." The first of Blackwood's men appeared at the main tunnel entrance, moving cautiously into the phosphorescent glow of the chamber. Behind them came Blackwood himself, a tall man with silver hair and pale eyes that seemed to hold no warmth or mercy. Elijah studied his enemy across the sacred chamber, noting the way Blackwood moved with the careful precision of someone fighting a battle inside his own body. Catalina had been right. The man was dying, and desperation had made him dangerous in ways that went beyond simple greed. "Magnificent," Blackwood breathed, stepping into the chamber with his gun drawn but lowered. "Absolutely magnificent. Do you have any idea what this place represents, Ravencrest? The healing properties alone could make a man immortal." "Some things aren't for sale, Blackwood," Elijah replied, his Winchester trained on the man's heart. "And some debts can only be paid in blood." Blackwood's smile was razor-thin and cold as winter. "Ah, yes, your departed family. And Roberto Delgado, of course. Did you know he screamed when my boys cut him down, kept calling for someone to protect his wife and unborn child?" The words hit Elijah like physical blows, but instead of rage, he felt a strange calm descend over him. Roberto's voice seemed to whisper in his memory, reminding him that some battles were fought not for vengeance, but for the protection of what mattered most. "Roberto died with honor," Elijah said quietly. "Something you will never understand. Honor doesn't stop bullets, Ravencrest." That's when Ayana stepped forward, her small figure somehow commanding attention from every person in the chamber. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate with the living rock around them. "Colonel Marcus Blackwood," she said in perfect English, though her eyes held depths that belonged to someone far older. "The spirits of the sacred waters know your true name. They know you were born Marcus Little Wolf to the Cherokee people, but chose to deny your heritage. They know the children you have killed to hide your shame." Blackwood's face went pale as death. "Impossible, me. That name died 50 years ago. You seek power over life and death." Ayana continued, her young voice growing stronger with each word. "But you are already dead inside. The water spirits will not suffer your touch upon their sacred gift." As the girl spoke, the water in the sacred pool began to glow more intensely, casting dancing shadows on the cavern walls. The low humming that had been present since they entered the chamber grew stronger, and Elijah realized it was the sound of underground rivers singing in harmony. "Enough of this mystical nonsense," Blackwood snarled, raising his gun toward Ayana. The shot that followed didn't come from Blackwood's weapon. Elijah moved with the fluid precision of his ranger training, his Winchester speaking once twice. The bullets took Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing against the rocky wall. But Blackwood's own gun had fired, and Elijah felt the bullet tear through his chest just below his left shoulder. The impact sent him stumbling backward, his vision blurring as pain exploded through his body. "Elijah!" Catalina's scream echoed through the chamber as she rushed to his side, her medical instincts taking over despite her own condition. The real battle erupted as Blackwood's men opened fire from the tunnel entrance, while Running Wolf's warriors returned fire from their concealed positions. The ancient chamber became a battlefield filled with smoke and the crash of gunfire that seemed almost sacrilegious in this sacred place. Through it all, Ayana stood calmly beside the sacred pool, her small hand pressed against the water's surface. Where her fingers touched, the glowing liquid ripples spread outward in patterns that seemed to follow some cosmic design. The water remembers, she said, her voice somehow audible above the gunfire. It remembers every guardian who has protected it, every sacrifice made in its name, and it chooses to give one last gift to those who would preserve its sacred trust. The glow from the pool intensified, bathing the entire chamber in ethereal light. Blackwood's men began to stumble, their shots going wide as something in the light itself seemed to disorient them. But it was what happened next that would be remembered in Apache legends for generations to come. Catalina, kneeling beside Elijah as she tried to stop his bleeding, suddenly gasped and doubled over. "The baby," she said through gritted teeth, "the baby is coming now." In the middle of a gunfight in an underground chamber, lit by phosphorescent minerals in ancient magic, Diego Gabriel Morales Ravencrest decided to enter the world. Running Wolf's warriors formed a protective circle as Ayana and two Apache women who had emerged from the side tunnels helped deliver the child. Catalina's labor was intense but mercifully short, as if the sacred waters themselves were easing the birth. When Diego Gabriel finally emerged, he was silent. Too silent. The baby wasn't breathing. Elijah, despite his wound, crawled to Catalina's side as she held her lifeless son. Her tears fell like rain onto the tiny face, and her sobs echoed through the chamber, with a sound that spoke of every mother's worst nightmare. "No," she whispered. "Please, no. Not after everything." That's when Ayana took the baby from Catalina's arms with infinite gentleness. "The spirits have shown me this moment," she said, carrying Diego Gabriel toward the sacred pool. Gifts require the ultimate trust." Without hesitation, she lowered the baby into the glowing waters of the heart of all waters. For a moment that seemed to stretch across eternity, nothing happened. Then the water around the child began to pulse with light, and ancient voices filled the chamber, not threatening but welcoming. The voices of every guardian who had ever protected the sacred springs, calling Diego Gabriel back from whatever dark place newborn souls go when they can not find their way to life. The baby's eyes opened, and he drew his first breath with a cry that harmonized perfectly with the song of the underground rivers. But there was something different about him now, something that made every person in the chamber stop fighting and stare in wonder. His eyes held depths of awareness that no newborn should possess, and when Ayana lifted him from the sacred pool, drops of water that fell from his skin continued to glow with their own inner light. "He is the bridge," Ayana announced, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "The child who will unite all peoples under the protection of the sacred waters. The one who will teach the world that healing comes not from conquest, but from understanding." Even Blackwood, wounded and bleeding against the cavern wall, stared at the glowing child with something that might have been awe. "Impossible," he breathed. "The legends spoke of such a one, but I thought they were just stories told by dying cultures." "All cultures die," Running Wolf said, approaching Blackwood with his rifle ready. "But some leave behind something worth preserving. You chose to abandon your heritage to kill and steal, rather than protect and preserve. The water spirits remember your choice, Marcus Little Wolf." As if summoned by Running Wolf's words, something extraordinary happened. The 7 streams that fed the central pool began to glow with different colors: red for the Apache springs, blue for the Navajo waters, green for the Mexican sources, silver for the Anglo settlements, gold for the Spanish missions, purple for the Aztec connections, and white for the Cherokee heritage that Blackwood had denied. The lights flowed into the central pool, creating a swirling pattern that told the story of all the peoples who had found sanctuary and healing beside the sacred waters. And at the center of it all, Diego Gabriel floated peacefully in Ayana's arms, his small body radiating the combined power of all 7 springs. "It's not possible," Blackwood repeated, but his voice held less conviction now. The cancer eating at his body seemed to be advancing more rapidly, as if his proximity to the sacred waters was forcing his own darkness to consume him. "You seek healing for yourself," Ayana said, and approaching Blackwood with Diego Gabriel still in her arms. "But healing requires acknowledgement of what has been broken. You have spent 50 years trying to kill the Cherokee boy you once were. How can the water spirits trust you with their gift when you cannot even trust yourself?" Blackwood looked at the glowing child, then at his own hands, hands that had signed death warrants and ordered massacres, hands that had pulled triggers and counted blood money. For a moment, his pale eyes seemed to hold genuine regret. "I was 7 years old when they took me," he said quietly. 7 years old when they told me I would never be Cherokee again, never be anything but what they made me. Do you know what it's like to kill your own soul to survive?" "Yes," Elijah replied, struggling to sit up despite his wound. "I killed parts of myself when Mariana and Tommy died. I let grief turn me into something less than human. But the difference between us, Blackwood, is that I found people who helped me remember who I was meant to be." He looked at Catalina, who had moved to support him, her face glowing with new motherhood and fierce protectiveness. Then at Ayana, whose ancient wisdom shone through her young features. Finally at Diego Gabriel, whose very existence proved that love could triumph over death itself. "It's not too late," Catalina said, her voice gentle despite everything Blackwood had done to her family. "The sacred waters forgive, but they cannot heal what refuses to be made whole." For a heartbeat, it seemed as if Blackwood might choose a different path. His pale eyes softened, and he reached toward the child who carried the power of 7 sacred springs. But then the sound of artillery fire echoed down from above, and his face hardened with remembered ambition. "My men have orders," he said coldly. "If I don't return within the hour, they'll collapse every tunnel into this chamber. Better that the springs be destroyed than fall into the hands of savages and outcasts." "Then you've chosen your path," Running Wolf said sadly. "The spirits will remember your decision." The gunfire resumed, but now it had a different character. Blackwood's remaining men were fighting with the desperation of soldiers who knew their retreat was cut off, while Running Wolf's warriors fought with the purpose of people defending something sacred. But the battle's outcome was decided not by bullets, but by the choice of a dying man who had forgotten how to live. Part 3. The Bridge Between Worlds. The artillery bombardment began at dawn, shaking the underground chamber with tremors that spoke of systematic destruction above. Blackwood's men were following their orders, collapsing tunnel entrances, and sealing off escape routes with ruthless efficiency. "They mean to bury us alive," Running Wolf observed grimly, checking the structural integrity of the chamber ceiling. Ancient Apache engineering had built these passages to last, but they weren't designed to withstand modern explosives. Elijah, his wound bound with cloth torn from Catalina's petticoat and treated with water from the sacred pool, found his strength returning with supernatural speed. The healing properties of the springs were working on his body, but more than that, he felt renewed purpose flowing through him like spiritual medicine. "There has to be another way out," he said, studying the 7 streams that fed the central pool. "Water finds its own path. If we can follow the source, the streams lead to the other 6 sacred places." Ayana explained, her young face grave with the weight of ancient knowledge. "But the passages are narrow, carved for water rather than people. Only one person at a time could make the journey, and it would take days to reach safety." Catalina, holding Diego Gabriel close to her chest, watched the baby with wonder and growing understanding. In the hours since his miraculous revival, the child had shown signs of awareness far beyond any normal newborn. His eyes tracked movement with unusual focus, and when he made soft sounds, they seemed to harmonize with the song of the underground rivers. "He's the key, isn't he?" she said, looking at Ayana with growing comprehension. "Diego Gabriel, he's not just a child who was saved by the sacred waters. He's something more." "The bridge," Ayana confirmed. "Born of 2 worlds, blessed by 7 springs, called to unite what has been divided for too long. The prophecies speak of such a one who would appear when the sacred places face their greatest threat." Another artillery blast shook the chamber, and dust rained down from the ancient ceiling. Time was running out, and decisions needed to be made. "What exactly can he do?" Elijah asked, his practical ranger mind trying to understand the mystical forces at play. "Show them," Ayana said to Catalina. "Take him to the central pool. Let him touch the heart of all waters with conscious intent." Catalina moved carefully to the edge of the sacred pool, then knelt and allowed Diego Gabriel to touch the glowing water with his tiny hand. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The chamber filled with light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. And suddenly Elijah could see the entire network of sacred springs as if from a great height. 7 pools of light connected by flowing rivers of pure energy, stretching from the mountains of Colorado down through New Mexico and Arizona into the deserts of Old Mexico. But more than just geography, he could see the people connected to each sacred place. Apache families camping beside hidden springs in the Dragoon Mountains. Navajo shepherds drawing water from a pool that never ran dry in Canyon de Chelly. Mexican villagers gathering for ceremonies beside a spring that had flowed since before the Spanish came. Anglo settlers whose sick children had been healed by water they didn't fully understand. All of them connected. All of them part of something larger than any single culture or belief system. The network isn't just about water, Elijah realized, understanding flooding through him. It's about connection, about showing people that they're part of something bigger than their own fears and prejudices. And now it's dying, Ayana said sadly. The sacred places are being forgotten, polluted, or destroyed by those who see only resources to be exploited rather than gifts to be protected. Another artillery blast closer this time. Chunks of rock fell from the ceiling, and one of the 7 streams began to run muddy as its source was damaged by the bombardment above. "We have to stop Blackwood," Catalina said fiercely, her maternal instincts aroused by the threat to her son's heritage. "But how he has us trapped down here." "Not trapped," Running Wolf said thoughtfully, studying the pictographs that covered the chamber walls. "Hidden, there's a difference." He moved to a section of wall that showed symbols different from the others, not Apache or Navajo or Mexican, but something older. Something that predated the arrival of any known people in this land. "The first guardians," he said, tracing the ancient symbols with reverent fingers. "They who came before all others, who established the covenant that all peoples would be welcome beside the sacred waters." "What are you thinking?" Elijah asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. "A calling," Running Wolf replied. "A summoning of all who carry the ancient blood regardless of what people they claim as their own. The network connects more than just springs, my friend. It connects hearts and souls across hundreds of miles." Ayana nodded slowly, her eyes taking on the distant look that meant she was consulting with spirits only she could see. "It could work," she said finally, "but it would require a sacrifice. Someone would have to stay behind to anchor the calling, to channel the power through their own life force." "I'll do it," Elijah said without hesitation. "No," Catalina said firmly. "Diego Gabriel needs a father, not another martyr. There has to be another way." That's when Diego Gabriel made his first conscious decision as the bridge between worlds. The baby, impossible though it seemed, pushed himself upright in his mother's arms and reached toward the central pool with both hands. When his fingers touched the sacred water, every pictograph in the chamber blazed to life with light that illuminated symbols and stories that had been hidden for centuries. And in that light, a new plan became clear. "We don't fight Blackwood," Ayana said, her voice filled with sudden understanding. "We heal him." "He's a murderer," Running Wolf protested. "He's killed innocents and destroyed sacred places." "He's a scared little boy who was forced to become something monstrous," Ayana replied. "The Cherokee child, Marcus Little Wolf, still lives somewhere inside Colonel Blackwood. If we can reach that child, show him that it's safe to come home, the sacred waters could heal more than just his cancer." Catalina finished, understanding the full implications. They could heal the spiritual damage that's been eating at him for 50 years. It was an audacious plan requiring trust and compassion in the face of mortal danger. But as another artillery blast shook the chamber, they all knew it might be their only chance. "How do we reach him?" Elijah asked. "With the truth," Ayana replied. "And with this?" She pulled something from her medicine pouch, a small piece of turquoise carved with Cherokee symbols. "This belonged to my grandmother, but before that it belonged to a Cherokee woman named Singing Bird. She was taken from her people when she was young, forced to live among strangers who told her she could never be Cherokee again. Blackwood's grandmother, the woman whose memory had been buried beneath decades of violence and denial. He needs to remember who he was before the world broke him." Catalina said, her voice soft with compassion that seemed impossible after everything she'd suffered. "Everyone deserves the chance to come home to their true self." The plan that emerged was simple in concept, but would require perfect timing and absolute trust. Using Diego Gabriel's connection to the 7 sacred springs, they would create a calling that would summon guardians from across the network. But more than that, they would use the baby's power as the bridge to reach across decades of pain and speak directly to the Cherokee child who still lived in Marcus Little Wolf's heart. As they prepared for what might be their final gambit, each of them understood that they were attempting something unprecedented. Not just the salvation of the Sacred Spring Network, but the healing of wounds that ran deeper than any individual tragedy. The artillery bombardment had stopped, which could mean only one thing. Blackwood was coming down personally to oversee the final destruction of the chamber. Remember, Ayanna said, as footsteps echoed from the main tunnel, we're not trying to defeat him, we're trying to save him, even if he doesn't want to be saved. Blackwood appeared at the tunnel entrance, supported by two of his remaining men. The cancer had visibly advanced during the hours of siege, and he moved like a man fighting battles on multiple fronts. But his pale eyes still burned with desperate determination. It ends here, he announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. I've placed charges throughout the tunnel system. Enough explosives to bring down half the mountain. You have 5 minutes to surrender the child and the artifacts, or we all die together. Or, Ayanna said, stepping forward with a piece of Cherokee turquoise in her small hand, you could remember your real name. She held out the carved stone, and Blackwood's eyes fixed on it with an expression of shock and something that might have been recognition. This belonged to your grandmother's singing bird of the Cherokee Nation. She gave it to my grandmother before she died, along with a message for the boy she'd been forced to leave behind. Blackwood's face went pale, but his gun remained steady. My grandmother is dead, has been dead for 40 years. Her body died, Ayanna continued gently, but her spirit never stopped waiting for Marcus Little Wolf to come home. She sang him Cherokee lullabies from beyond the veil, hoping he would remember the songs that could heal his broken heart. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. The voice came not from Ayanna, but from Diego Gabriel. Impossible though it seemed, the newborn baby was speaking in a voice that carried harmonics of the sacred waters themselves. You remember her songs, Marcus. You remember the stories she told about brave Cherokee warriors who protected the sacred places. You remember the pride in her eyes when she called you her brave little wolf. Tears were streaming down Blackwood's face now, years of suppressed memory and denied heritage flooding back like a dam breaking. She used to sing to me, he whispered. When I had nightmares about the soldiers coming to take me away, she would sing about rivers that carried messages between worlds. Those songs are still here, Diego Gabriel said through the voices of the sacred waters. In the heart of all waters, where every prayer and every tear becomes part of the eternal flow. Your grandmother's love didn't die with her body, Marcus. It became part of the network waiting for you to be ready to receive it. But I've done terrible things, Blackwood said, his voice breaking with 5 decades of accumulated guilt. I've killed innocence. I've betrayed everything she taught me about honor and protection. The sacred waters forgive, Catalina said, approaching him slowly with Diego Gabriel in her arms. But forgiveness without healing is just another kind of wound. You have to choose, Colonel. You can bow as the man you were forced to become, or you can live as the boy you were meant to remain. For a long moment, Blackwood stared at the glowing child who spoke with the voice of spirits and carried the power of 7 sacred springs. Then slowly he set down his gun and reached toward the baby with trembling hands. When his fingers touched Diego Gabriel's skin, light exploded through the chamber with an intensity that temporarily blinded everyone present. But it wasn't the harsh light of explosions or gunfire, it was the gentle illumination of dawn breaking after the longest night in human memory. When vision returned, Blackwood was kneeling beside the sacred pool, his face transformed by wonder and the kind of peace that comes when long exile souls finally find their way home. The cancer was gone from his body, but more than that, the spiritual sickness that had driven him to violence and despair had been washed away by waters that carried the accumulated healing power of 7 sacred springs. Marcus Little Wolf, he said wonderingly, as if trying out his real name after decades of denial. I remember now. I remember who I was supposed to be. The charges he had set throughout the tunnel system remained armed and dangerous, but Marcus Little Wolf, no longer Colonel Blackwood, disarmed them with the precision of someone who had finally remembered what was worth protecting instead of what was worth destroying. Epilogue, 10 years hence. The morning sun painted the expanded Whispering Creek Ranch in shades of gold as Elijah Ravencrest stood on the wide porch of what had once been a simple ranch house. Below him, the courtyard buzzed with activity as nearly 60 children of various ages and backgrounds prepared for their daily lessons at what was now known as the Seven Waters Academy. Diego Gabriel, now 10 years old and tall for his age, led a group of younger students in the morning water blessing beside Thunder Springs. His voice carried clearly across the water as he spoke in multiple languages about the sacred responsibility of protecting what had been entrusted to their care. Remember, he was saying in his careful, mature way, we are children of many peoples, but we are one family under the protection of the sacred waters. We promise to carry these lessons into the world to build bridges where others build walls. Catalina approached from the main building, her face glowing with the satisfaction of meaningful work. At 36, she had grown into her role as the Academy's director, while raising not only Diego Gabriel, but also serving as mother figure to dozens of children who had found refuge beside the sacred springs. The territorial education inspector arrived this morning, she told Elijah, slipping her arm through his. He wants to document our methods for possible implementation across the Southwest. And Marcus, Elijah asked, though he could already see the answer in the distance. Marcus Little Wolf, now known as Uncle Wolf to the children, worked in the garden with a group of Apache and Cherokee students, teaching them traditional agricultural methods while helping them master English and Spanish. His transformation from Colonel Blackwood to tribal elder had been complete and profound, though he still carried the weight of his past actions with humble responsibility. Ayana, now 22 and serving as the Academy's cultural liaison, emerged from the main building with a group of visiting educators. Her spiritual gifts had matured into practical wisdom, making her invaluable in bridging the gap between traditional knowledge and modern educational requirements. The delegation from Colorado Territory wants to establish a sister academy near their sacred spring, she reported. They've heard about our success in integrating different cultural approaches to learning. Elijah nodded, understanding that their little experiment in Arizona had grown into something much larger. Seven Waters Academy had become a model for communities across the Southwest, proving that cooperation was not only possible but profitable for everyone involved. What do you think? Catalina asked, watching Diego Gabriel teach a mixed group of children how to read the signs that indicated the health of the sacred springs. Are we ready to help establish other academies? I think, Elijah said slowly, that we've proven something important here. Healing is possible not just for individuals, but for entire communities wounded by centuries of division and mistrust. Diego Gabriel chose that moment to look up from his teaching, his eyes, which still held depths of awareness far beyond his years, meeting his adoptive father's gaze across the courtyard. When he smiled, it was with the radiance of someone who had never doubted that love could triumph over hatred. The sacred waters continued their eternal song, carrying promises of renewal and hope to all who would listen. And in that song, Elijah could hear the voices of all who had contributed to Seven Waters Academy's success. Catalina and Roberto, his Cherokee grandmother and Irish father, Apache warriors, and Mexican curanderos. Even Marcus Little Wolf's Cherokee grandmother, singing across the years about brave little wolves who protect sacred places. The storm that had brought Catalina to his door 10 years ago seemed like a blessing, now a sacred disruption that had awakened him to his true purpose. From grief and isolation, they had built a community that proved integration was possible. From broken hearts, they had created a legacy of hope that would endure long after they were gone. As the morning sun climbed higher over the Arizona Territory, illuminating the academy that had grown from love and loss, Elijah understood the profound truth his Cherokee grandmother had tried to teach him decades ago. When the earth dances with the sky, grandson, pay attention. The spirits are trying to tell you something. The spirits had been telling him that love multiplies when shared across cultural boundaries, that healing happens when people build bridges instead of walls, that the most sacred places on earth are not found in isolation, but in communities where differences become sources of strength rather than division. Seven Waters Academy would continue to grow, sending forth graduates who carried its lessons of cooperation and understanding into an increasingly diverse world. The sacred springs would keep flowing, calling to broken hearts and offering renewal to all who approached with respect and humility. But perhaps most importantly, the story itself would endure, a testament to the power of ordinary people to create an extraordinary change when they choose love over fear, inclusion over exclusion, and hope over despair. The sacred waters sang their eternal song of renewal, and in the high desert of Arizona Territory, the future looked as bright as the morning sun, reflecting off Thunder Springs, carrying light and hope to all who would receive it.